Welcome back to the CEC report. Only Glass-Steagall can pull our banks into line and defuse the housing bubble. Now, you know, the biggest contributor really to our housing bubble, which is completely out of control, is the fact that we have banks that are completely addicted to speculation. And so they use the housing market and the speculative price rises to build and spin money effectively to be able to keep their bad habit of derivatives gambling going, as we've talked about many times on the show. Now, there's been a few warnings just over the last week or so. The Reserve Bank of Australia, in their financial stability review, pointed exactly to a bubble without using the B word, but they exactly, outlined what a bubble is. They highlighted the fact that 23% of owner-occupier loans are interest-only mortgages and 64% of investor loans are interest-only, and the implications of what happens when they have to start repaying principal. 1/3 of borrowers, they also highlighted, have no buffer or a buffer of less than 1 month of repayment. So this is also a big issue. Then you had Martin North from Digital Finance Analytic, and he told Fairfax, "I have a feeling we are meandering our way, perhaps a little bit blindly, into a rather similar scenario to the US subprime mortgage crisis." You had warnings from Fitch, Standard & Poor's and Moody's to the AFR Banking and Wealth Summit earlier this month, and Chris Richardson, who's director of Deloitte Australia, the accounting firm, pointed out that many people's houses now technically make more money in a day than they do because of the appreciation in the value. And he said that's kind of God's way of saying this thing's gonna blow. So Craig, the only way to stop this speculative binge is Glass-Steagall. Can you explain what that is?
Well, Glass-Steagall is part of the re-regulation of the banking system, but the most important part, Lisa, where you separate out the legitimate, necessary commercial banking operations and ordinary banks, what we call the boring banking business, mortgages, housing loans, deposits and so forth. That's separated out from the other part of these banks that have become investment banks or merchant banks, insurance companies, stockbroking houses, so they become enormous, they become very, very big. On a global scale, they're referred to as too big to fail. In Australia, we have 4 of these too big to fail banks, which the big 4. And the idea is to separate out that speculative activity. And Australian banks are absolutely engorging themselves on these instruments called derivatives, which never used to exist prior to 1990 in any significant way whatsoever. But since the deregulation of the banking system, the banks have been able to put, of course, their corporate profits ahead of any other interest whatsoever. So what they've done is they've been loaning enormous amounts of money into the housing market. 60% of the bank's assets are loans and mortgages into this sector. We have an overinflated housing bubble by every metric you want to imagine. Just here in Melbourne, the median house price has gone up over $800,000 for the first time, which is basically double what it was 10 years ago. And this is unheard of, but it's a bubble, and that's the point. So Glass-Steagall is the first part of re-regulating the banking system so that you actually have a strong regulated banking system where people's deposits are protected and not allowed to be used by the banks for their speculative purposes. I think that's really the key. And
there's been a number of breakthroughs in the United States, which is very good news around Glass-Steagall in the last period. Glass-Steagall, which is already tabled as legislation to revive this legislation in the House of the US Congress, has now also been tabled in the Senate, and that was done by Democratic Senators Elizabeth Warren and Maria Cantwell, Independent Angus King and Republican John McCain, and another Democrat added her support the next day. There was also a meeting where Gary Cohn, who is the chair of Trump's National Economic Council, and he's a former president of Goldman Sachs, told the Senate Banking Committee that both he and Trump supported the idea of bank separation in a Glass-Steagall framework. You had US Senator Maria Cantwell. She's lobbying for Glass-Steagall, even calling up the media and so forth, and she's issued a mass petition campaign to collect signatures from the population for the bill. There are a number of other petitions also running, and there's been some excellent coverage where even the London Financial Times said that Britain's ring fencing rules could just be a prelude to a full-blown UK version of Glass-Steagall. The New Yorker said it's entirely possible now that the administration would propitiate the gods of public opinion by restoring Glass-Steagall. And Roll Call, which is a magazine up on Capitol Hill in Washington, said that Glass-Steagall can become one of the top legislative items in Congress overnight if Trump officials make their support for it clear and public. Also, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin just supported or re-expressed his support and Trump's support for a 21st century version of Glass-Steagall. So there's motion. We need to get it to in Australia.
And that's right, Elise. I mean, because we are still in the grips of a expanding global financial crisis. It is never solved from, 8 years ago now? And that's the point, is that if we don't move and re-regulate the system now, getting control of the financial system through Glass-Steagall, we can risk moving into a completely uncontrolled breakdown of the system, which will be an absolute nightmare for everyone on the face of the planet.
And that is what's actually on the cards right
That's right.
now. And in fact, a lot of the war drive and so forth is in reaction to the fact that the financial purse strings, which currently is the control mechanism from the Anglo-American Centre of Power, are unravelling. So be sure to contact us, give us a call to get the latest literature and join into the CEC report again next week.